before, it's 4:45, which, as part of the autumn schedule change, is time for our new short story programme. For the first week, we'll be featuring 5 stories that in recent years have proved most popular. Roger Rees now reads The Children of Grupp by Penelope Lively.
When Trevor Cartwright first saw the Medusa fountain, it was the nymphs which caught his attention. Naturally enough, he set down the wheelbarrow for a moment and had a good look. Very nice, too. All those luscious marble girls. It was his second day as trainee gardener at Rockwell Manor under the Youth Opportunities Programme. He was 17. He'd rather have been elsewhere. He wanted farm work, proper stuff with machinery, not messing about manicuring hedges and sweeping up leaves. The gardens of Rockwell Manor are renowned for topiary and statues. The Medusa fountain at the end of the famous yew walk is, of course, the pièce de résistance. The Medusa, framed by ferns and dripping grotto, presides over the great basin of the fountain, at the base of which a charming group of cherubs is arranged in frozen play. Around the rim of the basin sit or recline youthful naked figures, exquisite Apollos, and the languid nymphs which appeal to Trevor. The Medusa herself is so encrusted with moss and lichen that she is barely recognizable as a face, while the snakes of her hair have long since fused with the background of rock and greenery. Trevor did not even see her on the first occasion. In any case, he did not like to hang around too long, or he'd have Fletcher down on him like a ton of bricks. Fletcher was the head gardener and a right so-and-so. That he was in fact a first cousin of Trevor's, once removed, did not qualify his brusque treatment of the newest yop. So, having taken in the girls and the blokes, and all the stone babies larking around in the cool green water, no bad place to be on a sweltering August afternoon, Trevor upended the wheelbarrow once more and set off towards his next task. He knew the gardens well enough, of course. He'd been born and grown up a mile away. The hamlet of Grupp, a dour little collection of tied cottages, has traditionally supplied the labour force for the manor and its gardens, open to the public since the 1930s. Trevor's grandfather had worked there, and his great-grandfather before that. His own father had managed to break out, and got himself into the building trade when times were better. Now the economic climate had forced Trevor back into the mould. Resentfully he had presented himself at the estate office. His mother, of a more subservient and less querulous generation, had told him off for being truculent. There's always been a to and fro between Grupp and the manor. They're funny people, the Saxbys, but they've done all right by the village. Back in Grandad's day, there was estate parties once a year. Swimming in the fountain for the children, at a skittle alley in the stable yard. Trevor was unimpressed. The present owner, Colonel Saxby, was a recluse, inflated by local rumour to a vaguely sinister figure for no reliable reason. The wider world certainly found him unaccommodating. Art historians interested in the statuary were turned away with a handout to the effect that no records existed concerning the provenance of the various pieces and that photography was not allowed. The figures were of indeterminate age. Most appeared to be vaguely 18th century, though some of the draped classical ladies presiding over the yew walk might well have been earlier. The Medusa fountain, in particular, was a puzzle. Those experts who'd been able to inspect it closely felt that as a group it was not consistent. Figures seemed to have been added at different times. Even the cherubs, the adorable children tumbling and laughing around the foot of the fountain itself, appeared to the practiced eye to be slightly at odds with one another. Some so worn by time that features and dimples had almost vanished, others with their smiles and marble curls still sharply sculptured. The gardens did not, in fact, attract large numbers of visitors. Of those who did come, most were struck by the melancholy atmosphere of the place, an atmosphere that seemed indeed to spill out into the surrounding countryside, so that the dark hedgerows and lowering copses became an extension of the brooding manor gardens. If, on leaving the car park, they failed to take the turn that led back to the main road and fetched up, by mistake, in Grupp, the sense of gloom and abandonment would be reinforced. The cottages had a sullen look. There was neither shop nor pub. Appearance, indeed, was reinforced by reputation. Grupp people were said to keep themselves to themselves. There was gossip about inbreeding and absence of initiative. Certainly the hamlet had today a semi-abandoned air. Several of the cottages were in derelict condition. A demographic historian, attracted by interestingly high infant mortality rates, was met with cold stares and slammed front doors. Trevor, a child of Grupp, knew only that he yearned for a proper man's job with machinery, tractors and muck spreaders and combines, instead of which he was stuck in the gardens with a wheelbarrow and a rake and Fletcher bawling him out if he deviated from instructions for an instant. It was a summer of relentless heat and humidity, but employees at Rockwell were required to dress decorously. On his first day, Trevor had stripped to the waist and was roundly abused by Fletcher. Thereafter, he sweated in his shirt and cast envious glances at the marble nudity around the rim of the pool, the gleaming torsos, the pale curve of buttocks and breasts, the slender, bared limbs. It was all a bit sexy, too, no question about it. Could get you quite worked up when you were on your own with them, waving their arses at you from the trees. After his first brief glimpse of the Medusa fountain, Trevor found himself irresistibly drawn to the spot. He made several illicit detours that way, for the pleasure of a quick splash of the face and hands in the water. There was something gloomy about the place, that was undeniable, but the watery cool of it and the silver splash of the fountain compensated for the gloom, while he came to feel the figures positively companionable. One particular nymph became a favourite. There she sat, curled on the rim of the basin with her hand held shyly over her breasts, as though she had been caught out in a private skinny dip. On first acquaintance he had found her arousing. Now, after several visits, he looked at her differently, seeing her beautiful immobility as in some way sad and vulnerable. She seemed to have an expression of eternal shock and surprise in her blank stone eyes. He became bolder in his visits to the fountain. He lingered for longer, trailed his hands and arms in the water, sat on the rim of the basin for a minute or two, idly splashing. He was tempting Providence, and Providence inevitably struck. He had dunked his face in the water and was vigorously sousing his hair when a voice made him spring guiltily upright. "Take a dip then, boy. Go on. Get stripped off. No need to be ashamed of your body. You'd stand comparison with that lot by the look of you." It was the Colonel. Couldn't be anyone else. There he stood, just below the Medusa head, short, stocky, tweed-suited, grinning from the ferns and rocks of the grotto. Creepy, sprung from nowhere like that. We're not allowed to, stammered Trevor. We're not allowed to take our shirts off, even. "It'll be between you and me," said the Colonel. "Who's to know? Go on, boy. Don't be a fool." He bared his teeth at Trevor in what was apparently meant as a smile, and was gone. Trevor looked around. He was quite alone. He hesitated, then ripped off his shirt, jeans and underpants, and stepped into the fountain. It was wonderful, deliciously cool, and deeper than you would have thought. He was up to his waist. He waded around, reveling in it. He swam a few strokes. Then he rolled on his back and floated, blissfully, gazing first at the glimmering nakedness all around him, and then up at the dappled ceiling of leaves that flickered across a pale blue sky. He could have stayed there forever. Wiser to cut short the risk, though. Better get going. Reluctantly, he stood up, stepped to the edge, hauled himself out onto the rim and sat with his legs in the water to savour a last few delightful moments. The stone figures around him mirrored the contours of his own pink young body. He glanced, touched complacently, at his lean torso, his flat muscular flanks, his long legs. What had the old bloke said about comparisons with that lot? He looked across the pool at the grotto. The Medusa, snake-haired and mossy, stared straight at him. The light seemed to dim as though the sun had gone in. The frolicking cherubs dulled from gold to grey. It wasn't so warm, either. He started to withdraw his legs from the water. They felt oddly stiff and leaden. Maybe he got a bit of cramp. He reached out for his shirt, lying on the barrow behind him, to give himself a rub down with it. At least he tried to reach. But now his arm, too, was numb. Leaden. He could scarcely lift it. He hauled it an inch or two, and it fell back inert in his lap. Panic seized him. I'm ill, he thought. I've had a heart attack like Grandad. I'll die sat here like this. He tried to shout, and his jaw would not move. He moved his head, inch by inch, fighting his own rigidity. He tried to look towards the great yew walk, to see if anyone might be within sight. He could not see that far, but he was looking now at his neighbour, on the rim of the fountain, at the nymph, the girl, his favourite, she who shielded her breasts with one hand in eternal modesty, and her stone eyes met his, it seemed, not in shock or surprise, but in terrible grief. He saw the colour ebb from his own body. He saw the delicate veining of marble appear on his thighs. He saw himself become uniform with the nymphs, with Apollo, with the mermaid and the satyr, and with the cherubs, as plump children frozen in play at the foot of the fountain. Some while after, all feeling had left him, when he knew himself to be no longer a creature of flesh and blood, but an object, deep within which there lurked some awful consciousness of what had once been. Sometime then, he heard and saw the colonel. He saw him come again and stand below the grotto, contemplating his possessions. But Trevor had lost all sense of time by then. It might have been the next day, or the next month, or the next year. Time would cease to be for Trevor. The seasons would succeed one another as he remained locked within the prison of his fine young body. The snow would lie in ridges along his arms. The summer sun would bake him. The autumn leaves would pile up around him and float onto the surface of the water. He would hear the voices of visitors. The blank globes of his eyes would register their passage. Bright, moving blurs of colour. Far beyond the rigid presences of his companions, suspended in time, all of them, locked in a dreadful eternity of weather and memory. There they would sit and recline, the handsome youths, the graceful girls, and the cherubs. Oh, the thought of the children of Grupp is beyond bearing.
Roger Rees was reading The Children of Grupp by Penelope Lively. The producer was Sheila Fox.